In a recent video, I explained that the, in my opinion, best way to stay motivated while learning to code is to build your own little projects, build your own little real apps. Because if you work on something that you care about, then you will naturally have more intrinsic motivation to keep going, keep improving this, keep learning the necessary tools you need to build this. For me personally, this approach works very well. It works much better than trying to learn by just going through tutorials or learning material. But under this video, I got an interesting comment by Peter Zinchik that I want to answer here in this video. And what he's basically saying is that he is overwhelmed. So he tries to build his own apps like I suggested, but he feels like there is too much to learn. He becomes discouraged, and he also feels like Android is evolving too fast. Things are changing too fast, getting deprecated too fast, and overall he's just overwhelmed and discouraged, and he can't build his dream app. He can't build the app that he has in mind that feels interesting to him. And he says that even if he asks other experienced programmers for their advice, it's also discouraging because these tips are usually just opening up to more complicated other topics. And I know this feeling very well. I felt it a lot and I still feel so. So I want to say a few words about this. And make sure to watch this video all the way till the end, because I will also give you some communities that I use myself, which are really good to ask Android-related programming questions. Some of these communities are not so well known. It's not Stack Overflow I'm talking about here, but I want to wait till the end of the video because I want to cover some other stuff first. So I think what he's doing wrong, if I would guess, is that he's trying to do too much stuff at once. He's trying to learn too many different topics at once and implement too many features at once. And this happens if you try to build a big app. Many people, when they try to build their first apps, they try to start with something like a social network or some other complicated project. And you have to keep in mind that apps like Facebook and Instagram, they are not programmed by single developers over a few weeks. They are created by huge teams of developers over long periods of time. So you have to keep in mind that you will not be able to build something like this yourself from scratch, especially if you are still a beginner. And the same has happened to me as well. I started projects with too many features in my head and I tried to implement them all at once, and then eventually I got overwhelmed and I stopped working on this project altogether. So my advice is actually pretty simple. Start simple. Start with a simple app with the most basic features in it. This doesn't mean you have to scratch your whole idea, but maybe you can start building your idea in a more simple way and then add features to it incrementally over time. So for example, in my little just 10 minutes app that I talked about in another video, I also want to implement online accounts. I want to implement online features. I want to create my whole own server where people can upload their data basically, so it gets synchronized with different clients. I want to build a web version of this app eventually and all this stuff, but I started by building the most simple version of it. A version that doesn't have any online features at all yet. It's just an offline CRUD app that does database operations and stores them in a database, and this was already difficult. If you are a beginner, this already has a ton of stuff you have to learn. Dependency injection, how you use SQLite databases, how you structure your app, how to use view models and all this stuff. There's a lot of stuff you have to learn even to build such a simple app. So my suggestion is start with the most simple version and try to build something that works in itself. So it should work even if it doesn't have any all features yet that you have in mind as your end goal. Try to build something that works, because this is really motivating. And maybe even something you can already put on the Play Store. Again, don't expect to make a ton of money or any money at all from it for that matter. The main purpose is to learn, but while having fun. If you build something that works in itself, you get a little feeling of success. If you just have something that has many open ends, a lot of unfinished stuff, and you can't even really use it yet, then it can be really demotivating because you don't see an end. You don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's just too much stuff. This is a recipe for burnout, and the same has happened to me. But if you get these small steps, these small wins along the way, then your brain will release dopamine in response to it, and you will naturally keep this internal motivation to keep going. And you have to keep in mind that features like online synchronization, your own web server, authentication and the stuff, this is and offline caching, this is complicated. It's not easy at all, especially if you want to make it production ready, where you have to make sure that it really works, and then that it doesn't just work by 90%, it should absolutely work, and it should be safe, and you should not lose user data in production. This is all stuff you have to watch out for. But again, if you all try to implement this at once, then you will get discouraged by it because it's too difficult. Start simple and stay patient, because this stuff needs time to learn. You need at least a few months of really good, intense learning to be able to build a production-ready app, especially with online features and that stuff. But it's important that you have fun in the learning process, otherwise you will most likely just stop, or you will procrastinate a lot. And as humans, or as animals, actually, we evolved to learn by playing. We evolved to learn by tinkering with stuff and trying it out and having fun. We did not evolve to sit down and learn by memorizing content. So in my opinion, fun is a really important part of the learning process, especially in something like programming, which is really a big, fast changing topic that's very difficult. If you don't have at least some of the time fun doing this, then your life will probably just be miserable, at least your working life. And the name of my channel is Coding in Flow, and this actually has a special meaning. Flow is a term from psychology. Flow is the state you sometimes get in when you're really involved in a task or maybe some kind of sport where time and space seems to disappear around you. And this is also when we suddenly realize that 2 or 3 or 4 hours of time has passed and we thought it was like 10 minutes or half an hour. This is because your whole brain was focused on this task and you didn't have any capacity left to think about something else or even worry about something else. And naturally, these flow states tend to feel very good. They feel intrinsically motivating. There's actually a whole book around this topic, which is called Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I recommend that you read this. Again, this is where the channel name comes from. But in order to get into this flow state, the activity you're doing needs to have some very specific prerequisites. The most important thing is that the task has the right difficulty level. It should not be too easy, because then you are not getting involved in the task as much as you need to get into flow. Instead, you get bored, you get into a state of apathy, I don't know how it's pronounced. But the task must also not be too difficult, because then, as we already know, we get overwhelmed. And this also kicks us out of this flow state, and we get into this flow state by doing a task that is just slightly beyond our current capacity. So it should be a little bit challenging. It should not be too challenging, just enough that we have to actively think about it and try to figure it out. And if you listen to what I just said in the video so far, this is basically what I was explaining. If you build your own projects and don't make them too difficult, then you will get into this flow state often. And then you will often have times where you had really nice, productive 3, 4, 5 hours even, without ever looking at the clock. And you had fun doing it and you learned a ton doing it. So we want to get into this flow state as much as possible. And with this, again, it's important that we set the difficulty level of our tasks properly. One other thing I want to talk about is that he also mentioned that stuff is changing too fast, stuff is deprecating so fast. And I know that it's kind of a meme on Android that we have deprecations every week, and I make fun of this a lot myself, but it's actually not that bad. Most stuff deprecates after a couple years, so it's not like we have to learn new stuff every month. Even something like async task had a few years where it was actively used and it was completely fine to use it. And also many new technologies replace older ones that are actually pretty similar. So for example, RxJava, Live Data and Kotlin Flow are very similar. Live Data is a little bit different. Live Data is basically a Flow and RxJava in a light form with less features. But other than that, they are all tools for reactive programming and they work in very same ways. And RxJava has been around for I don't know how many years. So if you already knew how RxJava works, then you have an easy time learning Kotlin Flow, which is the most modern version of these reactive language features or libraries. So you don't actually have to learn a lot of new stuff all the time, and it's really not as bad as it sometimes looks, or some people make it seem, including me when I make fun of it. But this is also why it's important to understand the stuff you learn and not just memorize it. Don't just follow a tutorial and copy the code or copy it from Stack Overflow. You have to understand what is happening there, because this is what enables you to switch to a different library of the same feature and take the knowledge you already have and apply it to this new library. So the methods might be named differently, or you have some new features and some others are gone. But overall, for someone who understood reactive programming in RxJava times, switching to Kotlin Flow is relatively easy. One more tip I have is to make sure that you regularly get new input. What happens to me when I work on my app sometimes is that I just want to add features or solve bugs. I just want to work on my own code and only Google the problems that come up directly. And often when I find a solution for a problem, I don't even spend any time reading the text around it. So for example, reading the rest of the Stack Overflow answers on that same question. Often when I find my answer, I just use it, close the tab, and that's it. But this way it can easily happen that you don't get any new input and only do the same stuff over and over again and don't learn anything new. So what I do is I make sure that I regularly stop working directly on my project, take a step back and read some articles that I find interesting, and I read them top to bottom unless I find them useless in the middle. But I try to read them properly so I get new input, and then I try to implement this new input into my project if it feels useful. You can also watch some YouTube tutorials and just work through the project together with the instructor. Just something that lets you take a break from your own project and get some new fresh input basically. So you don't have this tunnel vision that sometimes happens, because this can be very tricky. It can keep you from learning anything new. Okay, and now I promise that I give you a list of some communities where you can ask programming questions, and I use these communities actively myself. So the first one is Reddit, and for Android developers, especially the Android Dev subreddit. It's a great place to ask Android development related questions. It's a great place to stay up to date about news in the Android development world. And I use it myself a lot. I ask a ton of questions there. The second source that's almost kind of a secret tip is the Kotlin Lang Slack channel. This is a great place to ask Kotlin related questions. Just make sure that they're actually Kotlin related, because if they are just Android questions, they're actually not allowed there and it's considered spam. But if they are Kotlin related questions like about Flow or about coroutines or about Jetpack Compose, for example, then you can ask them there and you get extremely high quality answers, because there are really smart people there out of the community. Many of them are very well known, and also guys like Ian Lake who work at Google and work on these Android Jetpack libraries, even they hang around there and answer questions all the time. Just make sure you don't spam. So to find the Slack channel, you have to go to kotlinlang.org/community. And here is a link to Slack, and you have to get an invite for this first, but I don't think they exclude anyone. I think everyone can get in as long as you behave properly. So click on this link and then you can write a request to an invitation here. Just fill out this form. The third place where I like to ask programming questions is actually Twitter. Now you might think that Twitter is not really a place to ask programming questions, but in my opinion it is. If you use the Android Dev hashtag, for example, then a lot of people will see your question if they follow this hashtag, even if they don't follow your account directly. And I find that I get a lot of interesting input and a lot of good answers there. And I use it a lot for like quick, small questions that I have where I'm interested to get input from a lot of different people. And sometimes I also do polls there. For example, what library people prefer out of different options. And lastly, you are welcome to join my Discord server, where we also have a few thousand people by now, where we have different channels to ask programming questions. Again, make sure to not spam there. Otherwise, I have to throw the ban hammer. You can find this Discord server under codingandflow.com/Discord. So I hope I see you there. That's it for this video. If you liked it, please leave a like under it. And actually, I want you to ask me more questions, especially these kind of meta questions that are not specific about a technical topic, but about the whole learning process and the stuff around it. I find this really interesting, and it's fun for me to talk about this stuff. So write new questions in the comments below, and then I'm happy to take a look at them and maybe make a video about them. And then I see you in the next video. Take care.